So Act 20 and Act 22 were two tax incentives that were passed in Puerto Rico. These are local laws. Um, I think almost 10 years ago or a little over 10 years ago now, initially, to do a couple of different things. Act 20 was for Puerto Rican, businesses, and to offer some tax incentives for um, folks who wanted to grow their business or establish a business, especially if they were going to, engage in exports. Act 22, which is the one that most people are usually talking about in this context, and the one that's been most damaging, is a tax incentive for people who are not Puerto Rican, or who have, had never lived in Puerto Rico, who moved to Puerto Rico, and they have the ability, if they meet some conditions, to not pay any, capital gains tax, so taxes on investments, other forms of tax on passive income. So it's incredibly attractive to investors, to crypto folks, to, a lot of really rich people who investment income is one of their main sources of income. And so then a few years ago, these two laws got kind of combined and wrapped up into what's now known as Act 60, which, includes the provisions from several of these original laws. But Act 60, and especially, those provisions from the original Act 22, what they've really done is that they've opened the island up to um, what a lot of us call sort of a new crop, a new generation of colonizers, right? Who come to live in Puerto Rico, not because they, love it, because they want to contribute to it, because they want to be part of the community. They come to save money. They come to exploit Puerto Rico economically in different ways. It's attracted a
Jake
lot of,
Paul and others.
yeah, exactly. It's attracted a lot of crypto folks. It's attracted a lot of real estate people who, buy up properties, sometimes buy up almost whole city blocks to turn them into Airbnbs. They'll evict longtime residents, by or hike up the rent on them to an extent that they can't pay. So it's created or exacerbated a housing crisis in Puerto Rico, where housing prices, rent prices have gone up. And when it's fueled a kind of gentrification and displacement and cultural shift in Puerto Rico, that is ongoing, and that is really concerning. And for folks who have seen, when Bad Bunny released his new album, Debí Tirar Más Fotos, he also released a short film with that. And it's kind of that vision of Puerto Rico's future, in which a lot of these, rich Americans have sort of bought up properties and taken over. And, the cafecito on the corner becomes a whole different thing. And it can really shift um, the culture and the identity of entire communities, and a lot of it can be traced back to these laws, which unfortunately are, local laws. And I think, kind of like with the debt, it's some of the bad structures that Puerto Rico has gotten stuck into, because it doesn't have the economic tools that it would have as a sovereign nation to really thrive. So it tries some of these kind of like patches and band-aids, and get rich quick schemes, like, oh, let's just offer a bunch of rich people incentives to come live here, that'll be great. But they don't actually create jobs, they don't really contribute meaningfully to the economy. They're just there sort of enriching themselves.
Right, until they want to move, and then they just leave, and again,
Right.
there's no contribution to the youth, to the elderly, to just the better life, right? A better way of living out there. They don't care. They're there for the tax breaks, or whatever they're there for. But once they're done, they just leave, and without really contributing nothing to Puerto Rico.
Yeah, and the reporting on this has been very clear, and especially work by the Center for Investigative Journalism in Puerto Rico. Because if they were doing all this stuff, but they were creating a ton of jobs, or they were really like meaningfully
Right,
improving the Puerto Rican economy, then at least you would say, okay, it's a trade-off, right?
right,
But they're not even doing that. They're not actually like making meaningful contributions to improving Puerto Rico's economic situation. So we're getting all the bad parts of it without getting the good parts of it.
right.
Yeah, for sure.